Thank you, Nico Kleynhans, for joining us in studio again. Always good to have you in our studios.
Good morning to you and also to the listener.
So, Nico, one of the things that you do is you give financial advice. You're a registered, certified financial advisor. And in that process, you sometimes have to help families and people who are grieving, specifically having lost a loved one. Please tell us about some of those emails and some of those situations that you've had to deal with.
I started this particular exercise in 1987. So that was long before emails, long before cell phones.
Yeah, true.
And those days, the way people approached you was very different. But I do remember one of the first letters I received simply said, "Mom passed away, and she left us the family home in Woodstock. And now Perm wants to sell our home."
Perm being a bank, home loan society kind of
That's right.
situation.
Perm was the building society. It was one of 3 or 4 building societies. They lent money to people who bought homes. So you wouldn't those days have gotten your bond from a bank. You went to a building society instead. And Mom owned a house. She had a husband with her. The husband passed away. On his death, she became the owner of the property. At the time of her death, she owed the Perm 1,000 rand.
Now, granted, back in 1987, 1,000 rand was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money. And the concept of a family home was new to me then. But what I then learned in that particular family, the family home meant that her sons and her daughters never moved out of the house as they grew up. They got married and they just got a room. So now the spouse moved into the room. So now instead of one family living in the house, there was now 2 families, 3 families, 4 families. And that they decided was the family home. And they thought that meant the accommodation was guaranteed for life. So when Mom died, because so many of the residents were unemployed, they didn't know how to agree on who or how they would settle the bond. And their solution was to ignore the debt. 5 years went by. They ignored the debt. The registered letters that came, they simply never signed for. When the sheriff came and pinned a notice on the door, they ignored. When the auction was held to sell the home, they ignored. When the sheriff came to turf their furniture onto the street, they woke up. But by then it was too late.
Way too late.
Because the problem they had was nobody was prepared to take responsibility for the family home once Mom died. I learned a very important lesson then. The next time I heard that concept was when 2 fairly wealthy people came to see me. He was a professional, she was a professional. They were married together. And each of them said that in their extended family, nobody seemed to be able to cope. And every single month, the family would come to them and expect bailouts. And they didn't want to do that for the rest of their lives. So as an act of kindness, he bought another home. And he said, those of you who are unemployed can go and live in the home. I will maintain the home. But then you don't ask me for anything else. And within a short time, that home was full because of his brothers and sisters and her brothers and sisters, and that home was no longer big enough. So they bought a second home, and that filled up, and a third home, and a fourth home. At that point, they came to see me and said, I can no longer maintain 5 bonds. No matter how much money we have, we can't. And that was the time the interest rate on bonds went up to 25%.
Ooh.
And now they had a choice. If they were going to continue the tradition of family homes, everybody was going to become homeless. And so they had to make the difficult decision of displacing their family and saying, you're going to have to find jobs. You're going to have to find alternative accommodation as well. I checked in about 3 years later and said, how's your family doing? And they said, well, once they lost their accommodation, they found jobs. They found accommodation. And we're back to what we can afford. And our concept of a family home now looks different.
Mm.
A couple of weeks ago, I got another cry for help. And this time, I've learned to approach it differently. And the letter said, Mom and Dad were married in community of property. Mom has passed away. And now Dad has to take over the home. But he needs 100,000 rand. Because when Mom died, there was not enough cash to settle the bond.
Ooh.
Dad is a pensioner, and he is unlikely to be able to pay that debt. None of my sisters and brothers are prepared to pay that 100,000. And now the family are expecting me to find the 100,000 rand to make a loan to Dad. Now that's fine. But now when Dad passes, I asked her, how do you get your 100,000 rand back?
Yeah.
Because the family believe that home belongs to the whole clan. And at some point, if you want your 100,000 rand back, that home has to be sold. What are the clan going to do with you? How's that going to affect your relationship? So if you're going to find a solution, that solution can't solve the immediate problem. It's got to solve the problem. How do you recover your money? Otherwise, you've got to accept you're making a donation of 100,000 rand, which you're never going to see again. Now, folks, we all, or many of our clans, have the concept of a family home, but we don't think it through. That concept only works if there is sufficient funds available on the death of the matriarch or the patriarch to make that a debt-free home. And if in your will you leave it to your 4, 5 kids, how do they decide in future who's going to pay when the window breaks? Who's going to pay the rates? Because if you leave it to 5 people and 4 don't want to cooperate, that concept is going to implode. And you're going to end up losing the family home in spite of your hopes and your dreams. So you need to have the difficult conversations. What do we do when Mom dies? What do we do when Dad dies? If you don't have those conversations, you're heading for trouble. And trouble that is going to cause a lot of pain, a lot of grief, and possibly a family split as well.
Sure. Very important to have these conversations, folks. So let's do it. And please, please, please don't delay. Don't put it off.